Welcome to Mile High Reefers. I'm Scott Anderson, and it's another Friday afternoon live streams. I love the live streams. They're a lot of fun. It's great to be able to check in and connect with all of you. So today, for a subject, I thought we'd talk about wild corals. As you guys probably know, I love wild corals. They are some of my absolute favorites. And today we're going to just talk about why I love wild corals. So as always, if you have questions, feel free to throw it in the chat. We'll get to them. But today I'm just going to start with talking about my favorite coral, and that is those wild collected live corals. They are just some of the coolest corals out there. So to begin with, wild corals. They are, in our hobby, predominantly collected from the Pacific Ocean. So kind of that Indo-Pacific area, Indonesia, Vietnam. We've got some coming out of Australia, little bits coming out of Tonga and stuff like that, couple little areas like that, and then we're getting a little bit out of the Caribbean. Those are going to be like your mushrooms and paleothoas and stuff like that. Few softies, stuff like that coming out of the Caribbean, but lots of cool wild stuff out there. Now, the trend in the hobby is aquaculture, and aquaculture is great for so many reasons, right? We can grow it on land. We can control the energy inputs that go into it. We can kind of tweak the colors so we can sell that most amazing colored coral. Aquaculture has so many great things about it. But I think over the years, we've kind of lost touch with some of the amazing stuff that we're getting from wild colonies. And to me, these are still some of the coolest things around. So wild colonies are exactly what they sound like. They're corals that are taken from the wild, so a collector goes out on a boat, collects it, and then it's shipped across the world. And, it usually goes to a wholesaler and then to a retailer. And eventually you go to that retailer or you order that coral and it comes to the end customer where that coral lives and grows in your fish tank. And that's kind of the essence of what we're talking about with wild collected coral. But what makes them so cool? Well, one of my favorite things about wild coral is there's a real chance that you're going to get something else that nobody has. So take something really simple like a scalemia. Scalemia are great corals. They're absolutely beautiful, but everyone is a little bit different. So if you pay that big money for that scully, you end up with this really cool coral that's a little different than what everybody else has. Now, obviously, there's your solid color ones that are the same, but once you start getting into the patterning and the striping and stuff like that, they're all a little different. Now, you'll see this with scullies and acanthophilias and these big single-headed polyps, but you'll also see them on all kinds of stuff. You'll see lords, like your old school acants, come out, different colors. Like, it just seems like once you start getting into the wild stuff, you find stuff that you've never seen before. You can't find anything like it online. And that's where you get to the really unique and fun stuff. And for me, that's always one of the things about wild is you can find stuff that's completely different. What's in your tank will be different than what's in anybody else's tank. Now, that's going to be coral specific, right? Because a green hammer is probably going to be like a green hammer. And of course, we got all forms of coral out there. Remember, every coral that's aquaculture these days came from the wild at some point in time. So at some point, all of these corals were from the wild. Now, the aquaculture stuff, we've grown out and we do amazing things with them. But there's some fun to be had on the wild side, one of which is cost. Wild collected corals can be, and oftentimes are, less expensive than your aquaculture stuff. And you might be thinking, what? How is it cheaper to take a boat out into the ocean, dive down, collect that coral, take it to a shipping facility, ship it all over the world, and sell it to the customer? Well, the good news is the energy input that went into actually producing the coral was nothing. It already grew in the wild. It was in the right place for that coral. So it's kind of a mixed bag as to what this is like for the ecology of the area. But in my opinion, if done sustainably, wild collection is actually, in many ways, better for the environment. What? Better for the environment than aquacultured? That goes against everything I've ever heard. Well, let's think about this, right? So we have a reef full of coral. If you take a piece off, a new piece grows back depending on what it is. But that coral that was there fulfilled a big portion of its life cycle on that reef that it was from, right? It was growing. It was part of that ecosystem. Now we've plucked it and we've taken it out, but the energy input that goes into that is pretty minimal, right? Because you're taking a boat out there and you're collecting it, but we spent nothing to grow it. And then when we're shipping it back, well, these planes that these corals are going on are flying anyways. The shipping is, it's boxes going on planes that are already going there anyways. So that's a good thing, right? And then it's actually good for the local economies. Like these people, just like you and I, they need jobs. So the coral collectors, they need jobs. And yeah, I'm pretty jealous of that job, right? Like if I could do that job and make a living at it in Colorado, I would. We lack reefs in Colorado, so I can't do that. But how cool would it be to get on a boat, go out and dive and collect coral for a living? That would be the coolest job. Imagine making a living diving on coral reefs, collecting coral. Seems like the coolest possible job. I mean, I want that job. That'd be amazing. So they're in many ways eco-friendly. We're providing for the local economies, and we get these amazingly cool corals. But how about for you guys as a customer? Well, a lot of times those prices are better, right? Because where aquaculture, you get little frags, little 1-inch frags, pretty much standard. The reason that is, well, coral grow pretty slow, right? So to make a business out of growing coral, you grow a little piece out, you put it on a frag, you let it encrust on that frag, and then you sell it, which is why the trend these days is to little tiny frags. Of course it is, right? But for those of you who are around in this hobby 10 to 20 years ago, you remember we had almost no frags, and you'd walk into a reef store and the tanks and tables were full of these big, beautiful, gorgeous colonies. Yeah, imagine full tanks full of colonies of euphyllias. I mean, when you went and bought a torch, you didn't get a head of torch. You got a colony of torch. You've got 6, 8, 10 heads of torch sitting there. Oh, you can still buy this. Absolutely, you can still buy this. We still import this every day, but the trend in the hobby has been towards the frags. And it makes sense for so many reasons. Let's go back to those torches we're talking about. Well, those torches are pretty darn expensive anymore, right? So a lot of times they get cut up. Well, that's cool. Makes sense with torches, but some of us have big tanks and we want big coral. And if you're like me and you're an LPS junkie, a lot of these corals grow real slow. Imagine trying to take an acan and grow it into a big colony. Well, it takes forever. Now, I'm probably going to surprise you when I tell you that the majority of your acans or lords that you get in are going to be wild collected, cut up, and healed. No way, right? Like, you thought these were aquaculture. Some of them are. But the reality is they grow pretty darn slow. So if they grow slow, it makes it hard to build a business aquaculturing it. So still, the majority of those lords that you see, those little frags, they're big colonies that somebody has cut up and healed. In fact, a lot of those frags you get, especially if you walk into a store and you buy those cheap frag packs and you buy those little frags and they come in on these cheap frag packs, that's how the stores buy them. Yeah. A lot of those are wild corals that are chopped up, glued to rocks, and healed. Now, this can be completely screwed up. The old chop shop thing is legit. It is super common, and not as much now as it used to be, but it's still super common for somebody to take a coral to the saw, cut it immediately, and sell it. Not the healthiest way to buy coral, is it? Because as a customer, we want healed frags. So another good thing to look for is that your coral is healed. Nice thing about wild collected is, well, usually they're not cut up, so there's not a lot of healing that has to happen. The other fun and interesting thing is with wild corals, you really don't always know what color they're going to turn. So it's kind of fun, right? So you order in an acro, it's going to come in one color, put it in the table. There's a good shot that acro is going to brown out. Well, that acro is going to brown out, and then odds are it's going to turn colors. What color is it going to turn? Who knows? Whatever color it wants, which is another fun thing, right? Also can be super annoying, right? You get this super amazing, beautiful coral. You put it in, and it turns green. It happens. But it's almost like Christmas getting these wild corals in. I was fortunate enough to work on the wholesale side of the hobby, and it was like Christmas, right? So you order in boxes and boxes of coral, and then you're opening them up, and everyone's different. You pull out a favia, and it could be similar to one you've seen, but they're always a little different growth pattern, little different color, a little different structure. Like, they're always different. And that's one of the fun parts. And then, you're not getting little tiny frags, right? You're getting colonies. And I love colonies. I have a big tank. I've always been a colony guy. And I still am today. Like, you'll see my tank, it's mainly colonies. That's the way to do it. So as a quick reminder, if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat column. We can talk about pretty much whatever you want. Subject today is wild corals and why I think they're so cool, but we can talk about pretty much whatever you want. So those are kind of my favorite things. Wild corals are amazing, right? That's how we get the big LPS. In so many of these corals, we will lose if we lose wild collection. Imagine lobos or symphilia or something like that. They grow way too slow to ever really be an aquaculturable coral. Take my big green bubble. You guys gave me so much crap for cutting that thing up, right? I used my tile saw to cut it, and you guys gave me a bunch of crap because I used the tile saw. And in my opinion, that was the best tool for the job. Big, thick, heavy blade, cut it really fast. It really worked well. But here's the deal. I cut 2 little heads off of that coral. I have had that coral for like 7 years. Took 7 years to produce 2 heads. There's no way you can build a business case around that, right? You can't. So stuff like that has to be wild collected. The other thing is the ecological side we talked about. And honestly, I don't want to sound like a pessimist, but I don't see the world governments doing what they need to do to fix our reefs. We can have debates about what's causing it, and depending on where you're at, it's different things, right? But we got global warming, global acidification, we've got development on the land, above the reef, overfishing. There are so many things that affect these reefs, but honestly, I don't see the governments getting to fixing it, right? Like, not in a time period that's going to save massive amounts of coral. And whenever you see these bleaching events go through, you have to think to yourself, well, wouldn't that coral be better off sitting in a tank? I mean, I think it'd be better off in a tank, right? Like, the animal alive is definitely better than bleached out dead. I really can't think of an argument beyond that. Like, it just seems wrong to let them bleach. Like, leave them in the ocean. How are we helping anything? They're just going to die. Now, that's a bit of a pessimistic way to look at it, but, until we actually start fixing the problem, it almost seems like the right thing to do. There's a disease going through the Caribbean right now, and it's wiping out coral, and it is illegal to collect Caribbean coral and grow it in the hobby. Completely illegal. I understand why, and it makes sense. It's part of the Endangered Species Act, and we want to preserve our reefs. But I could really see here a public-private partnership working really well, right? You take those corals off the reef, just give us a few, put forth some regulations so that we can do this, in a sustainable way, and we can grow them in our tanks and preserve those genetics. Like, this disease right now is pretty much unstoppable. So why not? What's there to lose? We take a tiny, tiny amount of coral out of the ocean, and we as reefers can save it. I see no problems. And in fact, the way the world is set up now, if something really bad did start happening around the world with the reefs, like, we have crap loads of corals preserved in our reef tanks as reefers. In a way, I kind of feel good about that, right? Because I don't want to live in a world without frog spawn and acanthophilia and acropora. We have it all. Now, it would be sad to watch these ecosystems collapse, and I don't want to see that. But as long as we are allowed to keep reefs, like, there's no reason that people can't have coral in 500 years. Every coral in the ocean could be dead. But there's no reason this hobby can't go on. And that's one thing I think is really cool. But for now, these coral are there. We should be sustainably collecting them, right? Sustainable. That's the biggest part of the goal. Like I said, remember, if you sustainably collect, it's no big deal. Acropora grows really fast. So if you break off a branch but leave the entire colony, we all know how fast acros grow. Like, that's good for the world, in my opinion, right? Basically, it costs the reef almost nothing. Like, a piece of acro being broken off happens every day. Tides go through, waves go through, fish go through. This stuff gets broken all the time. It's just part of the natural cycle. So if we pull small amounts out, not that big of a deal. And there's no energy cost to it. And as a reefer, I absolutely love being able to see all of the cool coral that come out of here. So that's kind of my little story for the day. So, we're 20 minutes in, kind of a shorter live stream, but Ian just got back from New Mexico, so I think I'm going to hang with him. So that's why I love wild collected coral. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Mile High Reefers.